Good morning. Boy, great energy. So I think we all know how important infrastructure is, whether it's gas and power, broadband, roads, they're all critical, need maintenance, but it's not easy to build consensus or develop and implement a plan. I mean, look at Highway 1. Well, I'm here to... Yeah, I know many of you did. Well, I'm here to introduce someone who has vision. He has the street cred to make things happen. You can see all of his experience and credentials in your program, so I'll just highlight a few. First, he's a graduate of both Harvard and Stanford. He is Director Emeritus of McKinsey & Company. He's co-chair of California Forward, Senior Fellow at the Presidio Institute, the Chair of Children Now, the founder and chair of Fuse Corps, which enables local governments to more effectively address the biggest challenges facing urban communities. He's the vice chair of Stanford Graduate School of Business Advisory Council, and the list goes on. He serves on numerous boards, and I'll just name a few. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the Board of Trustees for Junior Statesmen of America, Advisory Board of QB3, and the Public Policy Institute of California. And what else? Well, he's also on the board of the Super Bowl 50 Fund, which is pretty cool. He has 2 daughters and founded the Half Moon Bay Brewing Company and the Mavericks Beer Company. He's a cyclist and involved in a wide variety of other things, and I don't think sleep is one of them. He's been called, and I quote, a renaissance man in every sense. So forget Dos Equis. Think Mavericks Tunnel Vision IPA, and welcome the most interesting man in the world, Lenny Mendonca.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's hard to follow that, so I appreciate that's overly generous. And I want to start with saying, before diving into this discussion, which you'll see as it's titled, is about political will. And I think that is the real challenge in both this topic and much of what you're talking about during the course of today. And I wanted to start by congratulating all of you. I do think the locus of attention where anything's going to happen in this state and in fact across the country is regions. And the fact that you are all coming together, spending real time, putting the difficult issues on the table, having a candid conversation about them, and working across sectors to come up with solutions is exactly how things are going to get done. So congratulations to all of you on the beginning of an important journey to ensure that the Monterey Bay, Monterey County, and Santa Cruz counties are at the forefront of the future of the state of California. So congratulations. I apologize for breaking up the discussion. I know that you all wanted to meet with each other as opposed to listen to me up here talking, but there'll be plenty of time for that. And I would encourage you to lubricate it with a little Mavericks beer at the end of the day. That'll make it a much better conversation. So please enjoy that. So what I want to talk about is the challenge of building political will to create the kind of infrastructure that we need going forward. And I don't want to leave you with the feeling like the only way to go is to turn to defeat. It's often a challenge when people are talking about infrastructure to get frustrated and angry and annoyed and feel hopeless about the magnitude of the problem. And I'm going to start off by allowing you to feel that because I'm going to give you some numbers about the scale of the challenge. But what I do want you to do is think about this problem as an opportunity for regional collaboration. Because my punchline is going to be the only way we're going to make progress on any of the infrastructure needs in this region is that this region has to lead it. You can't wait for a person on a great white horse from Washington, D.C. or Sacramento to solve these issues. It's going to happen locally with the leadership that's required to come up with political will to move this forward. Paul Ryan's first bill that he's bringing to the House as Speaker is a renewal of the Transportation Infrastructure Bill. I don't have any predictions about how that's going to go, but if you think that the Congress is a fully functioning, fantastic institution that is going to solve all of these problems and that will have something that you don't have to worry about anything locally, good luck. I am more optimistic that over time there will be progress nationally on some of these issues, but Congress has not passed anything beyond a two-year extension of transportation funding in over a decade. So don't wait for Washington to do it. This is a challenge not only for nationally, but it's a challenge in California. And let me just start with a few of the facts that will get you depressed. So this is a picture of one of those challenges in the state of California, which is water. The EPA has said that California is the highest state in terms of needed investment in water infrastructure. That includes $45 billion of water infrastructure, $26 billion in drinking water, $8 billion in water treatment, $6 billion for water storage. In addition, over the next 10 years, another $4.5 billion a year in wastewater management. And even assuming that we don't have an El Nino, $2.8 billion a year in flood control. So we have a huge challenge just to deal with the backlog of investment that's needed in all of our water. That is even assuming that we're not in a big drought. Water is going to be one of those important needs that you have to have a perspective on what are the priorities and what are we going to fund, because there's no way we're going to be able to fund all of that investment, and we're certainly not going to be able to fund it quickly. Roads are another huge problem. The 2012 California statewide local streets and roads need assessment found that the roads in this state, as we all know, are rapidly deteriorating. The average ranking of a road in California is at risk. Nearly twice the current funding level is necessary to even just maintain the status quo. And in the next decade, the estimate is that to bring us up to best management practice in roads in the state will cost $82 billion. We already, if you drive anywhere, and not just doesn't include driving up Highway 1 where I came from Half Moon Bay today, 7 of the top 20 most problematic streets in the United States are in California, including the number 1 and 2 in San Francisco and Los Angeles. We clearly have a big challenge with roads that are necessary to be funded. Just for deferred maintenance alone, the governor's recent infrastructure plan, 5-year infrastructure plan, said we need $66 billion to just catch up with deferred maintenance in the state, $60 billion of that in transportation. So now that I've got you totally discouraged and feeling like the magnitude of these numbers are unassailable, I want to talk a little bit about the opportunity to do something about them. First, recognize that there is no statewide solution that's going to solve this in a large way. The governor has a 5-year infrastructure plan. I'm sure Lieutenant Governor will talk about this as part of his conversation, called a special session on infrastructure, and nothing came out of it. There will be some things that will probably be on the ballot to continue to provide some funding sources on the margin for infrastructure. But the state has been spending about $10 billion a year for the last decade on infrastructure. The numbers that I described earlier suggest that if you add that all up, that number needs to be 2 or 3 times that amount. That is not going to come from a general fund. We're in as good an economic times as we've had in a while in terms of the state budget, and the state's spending less than 1% of the state budget on infrastructure. We're bonding a lot, but more than half of the funding that's done in bonds in the state, more than half of the amount that is spent every year on infrastructure is paying the interest on bonds that were already out there. So we do have a challenge about trying to figure out, is there something that can be done at the state level? And it's important that when you're talking to your representatives and you're talking to the governor's office, that you continue to say that this is important. We do need more investment at the state level, but that's not going to be the solution. There is a silver lining in some of this, which is that technology will be part of the solution to this. I drove down here in my Tesla. It didn't have the self-driving feature, but if it did, it would have been great because I was stuck in traffic for half the time. But the opportunity to use technology as part of this solution is much closer than you might think. That doesn't mean we don't need to invest in the existing infrastructure or ensure that we are investing in the deferred maintenance that's creating problems already. But self-driving cars, the opportunity to use autonomous vehicles to put more vehicles on the road, the opportunity to use technology for different mechanisms to raise revenues to help fund some of these things is going to be part of the answer. But in the meantime, we still need to invest in things that do make sense. If we don't, here's what's going to happen. California is a fantastic place, but it's not a fantastic place if you can't get around. So we do want to make sure that we're not living in this kind of Hotel California. So what's the solution? An important element of the solution is what the governor calls subsidiarity, which is it's not just calling up and waiting for someone else and saying, you do something. It's about trying to figure out the opportunities to do it more locally. I'm going to spend the last portion of the time that I'm going to talk and then open it up for questions around some tools and instruments and some examples of where that's working. The first and most important one in California is a set of, and this is a little hard for you to read, but it'll be on the website, a new set of financing tools called clumsily the Enhanced Infrastructure Financing Districts. But they're a very important vehicle that are only recently available and are in process of being utilized for a whole set of more innovative mechanisms to finance infrastructure. This is not your grandfather's Joint Powers Authority. It is not redevelopment authorities too. What it is an extremely interesting and flexible tool that allows you to fund infrastructure projects using tax increment financing. And importantly, it allows jurisdictions to collaborate to create a new entity that can help raise that kind of resource and fund it in part by the increment of the property tax or sales tax that happens when that improvement is done. So it can be used for a wide range of projects. And in fact, the intent of this legislation is not to say what you can't do, it's to help create the vehicle to be able to try some things. So it can be used for everything from transit priority projects, affordable housing within mixed income developments, the entire range of water projects that I mentioned, transportation facilities, renewable energy projects, community parks, recreation facilities, and open spaces, brownfield restoration, and industrial park structure, construction, or repair. So it is an incredibly interesting vehicle, and I encourage any of you who are interested in how infrastructure can be financed utilizing this kind of vehicle as a component of the capital stack, not the whole one, but an important component of it, to take a look at this material and a whole lot of other material that's available on the California Economic Summit website. And if anybody wants to know more about it specifically, just let me know and I'll connect you with some of the experts on it. But it's a vehicle that can allow you to create local revenue streams based on the fact that by improving the infrastructure, the property value around it will improve. So it's an important vehicle that I think will be more common across the state. Part of what's necessary to make that really work is a plan that there is real alignment around. The only way those types of instruments are going to work is if there is local alignment around priorities and a sense that the jurisdictions that are involved agree on those priorities. It's a very interesting example in another state that's happened around this. In Austin, Texas, the city put a transportation plan on the ballot, and despite having the endorsement of the mayor, the Chamber of Commerce, labor, pretty much every elected official, it failed. So what they did, instead of saying, well, I guess we can't do this, is they entered into a broad-based community engagement process. A not-for-profit here in Atlanta set up this process called Mobility Atlanta, and what they did is hold a whole series of town hall meetings across the city, and then resulted in a collective community alignment around what those priorities were that in fact were pretty close to what the measure was, but they got people engaged in the process, and it's going to go back on the ballot, and they'll likely win this time because it wasn't handed down from a group of people without community engagement, but was a combination of thoughtfully engaged analytic, technical support, but real community engagement to come back with a solution that they might be interested in. Enhanced infrastructure financing districts and the tools aligned with that are hopefully going to be part of the financing mechanisms for the extension of BART to the South Bay. Part of the challenge with the Valley Transportation Authority has had in San Jose is to be able to try and find the revenue or the bonding capacity to be able to finance the stations that everyone agrees that you need to have to allow BART to ring the bay. So part of what they're looking at is in the various stations that are going to be opening in the next decade in the South Bay to create a financing district around it, utilizing this capacity and having part of the funding come from the increased value of the real estate that is around those stations. So this is in deep exploration with the VTA. They're not there yet, but this is an example of a type of process and project that would have never happened if they were going to wait for federal funding for mass transit or for the state to come in, but utilizing existing resources, some county measures, and the EIFD, they think they can get there. This one to me is even more interesting and bold. Does anybody know where this is, what this picture is? This is the LA River Basin. This is most of the time of what you think of when you see in the LA River. It's either a film noir movie of somebody in the middle of that big, ugly cement structure, or it's the Terminator walking out of there. But that's largely what people think about when you think about the LA River Basin. And as a result, it's largely been a barrier to economic activity. But interestingly, in part driven by a group of students at USC, they've come up with a plan to renew the LA River Basin that would turn it into an attractive, ecological part of the entire county, and have it be something that could be financed by the fact that you'd much rather live by something that looks like that than something that looks like this. And so what they have done is put together a plan in phases to try and help redevelop the LA River Basin in a large, substantially interesting project, in part financed by that kind of vehicle, helping ensure that people will much rather live around something that's attractive and turn what was a barrier into an economic asset. So that's an example of the bigger, bolder aspirations that you see going on in the state. And finally, my favorite example is what's going on in Atlanta. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Beltline in Atlanta. Is anybody from Atlanta in the room or spent any time there? It's California, nobody goes to Atlanta. But, okay. This is an incredibly interesting idea that came from a graduate student at Georgia Tech's master's thesis in urban planning to say, if you know the history of Atlanta, a lot of it was driven by railroads intersecting in Atlanta, but the railroads tracks were largely abandoned. And so it was blight both around the perimeter of Atlanta, and because the railroads cut across Atlanta, was a lot of physical barriers between neighborhoods. So his project was to say, why don't we take all those abandoned railroads and turn them into walking, biking trails, and create an opportunity that what is now a huge, ugly barrier between parts of the city become a place where people want to walk, ride their bikes, bring their kids, and some of the most interesting, newest developments in Atlanta that are the hip places where everyone wants to go are right next to these trails. So they turned something, again, that was an ugly physical constraint into an asset. And part of how they did this was, first of all, it was the most fascinating part to me about this was it was a 22-year-old graduate student at Georgia Tech who came up with the idea, wrote his thesis in 1999, presented it. There was huge enthusiasm from Georgia Tech. They got some foundations involved to help fund the planning. Eventually became something that the city council put some money in to get it going. Went to the voters for a larger bond, and got some federal money on it. Now it's the single largest urban redevelopment in Atlanta's history from some 22-year-old's idea. And what they've done is think differently about those assets, turn something that otherwise was a problem into something valuable. And now it's a very attractive part of the Atlanta infrastructure system that utilizes assets that were underappreciated, and they did it in part by financing it through the development that happened around those areas. So it's not the EIFD in California's legal structure, but it's the same idea. Help take something that was blighted and then turn it into an asset. So I just say those as examples, not to say that this is what you need to do here. I say them as an example under the overarching point that the way we're going to build infrastructure going forward is that a 22-year-old in Georgia Tech is going to figure out what's an idea of how we can do something. They're going to build broad-based community agreement and alignment. They're going to help bring public and private and philanthropic resources together. And then it's going to create economic value that creates new tax revenue that can finance it. That's the way things are going to get done. We're not going to wait for Washington. We're not going to wait for Sacramento. Regions and regional collaborations like you've got here are going to come together, and we can do it. So happy to answer some questions. I'm not going away. I'm just going to grab a water.
Push that back. Okay, hello. I'm Peggy Dalginus with Crusoe Internet, and one of our companies like our personal goals is to get 3,000 people off the roads within a 5-year period. We all know that relieving congestion is part of the answer to our transportation problems, and that can happen in more than one way, not just by improving roads or other transportation, but also by taking people off the roads. And the way that we are trying to do it, a couple of ways, but one of them is through better broadband. Now, we have the dig once policy that someone mentioned earlier today, but we're finding that there's a tremendous problem because the budget for the roads don't include any money for the infrastructure, even though it's inexpensive to put conduit into the road while it's being built. It's relatively very inexpensive, but the budget is so tight for the public works departments that they can't do it. And that is preventing us from taking advantage of dig once. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas about how we could work around this.
So, first of all, you're raising an important point about the opportunity to use different kinds of technology to solve the challenge that you're facing, and just having more and more people on roads is probably not the right longer-term answer. Enabling people to meet them where they are and enable them to be productive where they are is an important part of that. Unfortunately, a lot of the way that we plan, finance, and budget for projects makes it harder to do what you're just describing. I don't have a silver bullet answer to that other than to say two things. One is, in existing budgetary processes and bonding activity, make sure that that's included in what the options are. Don't narrowly define it in a way that you can't accomplish that, because dig once is a simple message to communicate, and something that as soon as you explain it to people, they say, well, that makes total sense. Why don't we do that? So that would be one. The second one is, to the extent that you are, and someone is going to look at any other kind of financing district to be able to do that, all that could be included in it. It could be part of the plan to say, this is part of our longer-term full solution that's going to include the ability to make sure that we have the technical infrastructure to support what we're trying to do as well, and ensure that that's part of the financing plan. So I don't have a simple answer for you. Budgets are constrained everywhere, but making sure that it's aware and part of the community engagement and part of the plans and the financing would be my only suggestion.
My name is Safwat Malik. We're Enviro International Architects and Builders, and political will, getting people off the road, is the answer. And I don't know how you would do that. Take as an example, BART ended in Daly City for years and finally got connected to the airport. Why is BART not connected down South Bay? Why don't we have the railroad that used to come to Monterey get back? Mass transit is the answer, among a whole bunch of other things. So how do we, as people, impart on the politicians to think differently instead of widening the road, one more lane, one more lane, one more lane? I mean, every time I drive 101, I see one more lane being built.
Right.
That's not the answer.
So I'll give you a very specific answer, and then I'll give you a more generalized answer. The specific answer about why BART doesn't go down that part of the peninsula is because San Mateo County opted out of the BART tax in the first place. So people in San Mateo County, and I'm one of them, we're to blame for the 101 problems because we didn't, in the early days, decide that it made much more sense to have BART ring the bay. And so what we're doing now is, at 10 times the cost and 50 years later, putting it in after the fact. It will get there eventually, so it does go to San Francisco Airport. There was an extension from the Oakland BART station to the Oakland Airport. The San Jose, South Bay terminals are an extremely important part of that infrastructure, so you got to get the planning and get the political will right when there's big efforts going on. So that's the specific answer. The more general answer is, I think you have to be really thoughtful about what's the right infrastructure, transportation connections that you're trying to build that are going to work for you. So being able to say, this geography has a certain set of characteristics about where people live, where they work, et cetera, and let's come up with a solution to that is what you've got to come up with. I don't know the answer to that. I will say that part of the solution for Highway 101 isn't to continue to widen Highway 101, it's to use the bay and put ferries on the bay to help enable people to get off the roads and use the different transportation modes that are available to accomplish that. The last time that seriously got considered was after the earthquake in 1988. The last time the A's won the World Series, that's the way I remember it. It was an emergency need because the Bay Bridge was down. So all the legal authorities there, it's the political will to say we actually need to make that investment. And so I do think it does require a mixed mode of transit to be able to solve these problems. I think there are many places where more fixed line transit like BART makes sense when you have urban density like around the Bay Area. There are other places where it doesn't. And I'm not sure it does here. You're going to have to decide that for yourself. Mass transit could include buses or other vehicles. It doesn't necessarily need to be a fixed, high-cost, not very movable rail system to accomplish that. But that's part of what you have to figure out.
My name is Tom McCullough. Went to USC. Head of sales for FS Studio. You guys at Stanford and Cal, I tell you.
Do you mean that top 10 football team, Stanford? Is
Yeah,
that the
I
one
know.
you're talking about?
It's been a tough year. Been a tough couple of years. Anyway, back on track. First of all, the railroad that used to run down to Pacific Grove was shut in 1972. And obviously that was because of ridership. Those tracks are now covered with concrete and are bike and walking paths. So you don't have to go to Atlanta to get an example. We've got one right here in Monterey. Also, in regards to the cost of infrastructure, we've got $68 billion that is ostensibly being spent on a high-speed rail system. Excuse me, why don't we put that into our existing infrastructure? You drive a Tesla, you made a comment about self-driving cars. By the time that rail system is in place, self-driving cars will be prolific. I mean, the folks in our state government don't get it.
So it ended with, isn't that true? That was the question. So, I'm going to give you a serious answer to it, though, which is that's why you can't rely on the state government to say, figure out what's right for here. You need to come up with the solutions that are regionally specific. There are people in the Central Valley who believe that high-speed rail is absolutely essential to connect them to other parts of the state. I'm not going to debate that. I do think, though, that your generalized point around figure out what you want that works for you here, and then that's what you need to do, I think is a much better way to get things done.
Hi, Rochelle Leroy, I'm with UC Santa Cruz Community Relations, and I'm also a Santa Cruz City Council member. This isn't my question, but I just want to remind people that the state of California isn't imposing high-speed rail on all of us. We voted for it. That's why it's going forward. So the point I wanted to make, though, was the United States and the state of California used to actually spend money on infrastructure. And there was a time when it had the money to do so, and I really hope that we don't ever go back on that ideal, that we have a federal and state government that invests heavily in infrastructure. And as much as I can see the reality of the picture you're painting, that, you know, we're kind of on our own islands needing to figure out how to pay for infrastructure, it's really putting things together with spit and bubble gum. And systemically, if we're going to be successful, we've got to get back to the days where federal and state government actually invests in infrastructure, or else we're going to be like Italy. I mean, we could just stand here to admit that we'll be like Italy from now on and have kind of a rickety infrastructure. But what I'm hoping is, do you see any chance that we're ever going to get back to a point where the state and feds actually invest in infrastructure? I mean, part of it is our system of taxation, too. When the McDonald's down the street pays $200 less a month than I do in property taxes, that's also an issue. So any optimism in this regard?
No, so first of all, I think Santa Cruz County and Monterey County have better wine than Italy, so you can say that that's, so, so I do think there will be renewed state investment in infrastructure, and over time, Congress, not likely in any scale during this Congress, but there will be reauthorization of some financing. And it is important that when you're talking to your representatives that you reinforce how important that is. But what I would say is the way that's going to happen is that it's going to be catalyzed locally, and then the state and federal money will be on top of it. And so my point is, get going now, have that be part of your longer-term plan, and then make sure that you've got revenue sources for some of these too. I mean, part of the challenge with financing infrastructure in this country, at least, is that we assume that it's a public good and wait for somebody else to pay for it with their taxes, as opposed to revenues that are available to finance the investment that's necessary to make it going on an ongoing basis. Yes.
Hi, my name is Leslie Connor. I'm Executive Director of the Santa Cruz Community Health Centers. And I was interested in your slide on the LA River and the vision of investing and making this beautiful place for people to live. The only thing I would ask is there are currently people who are living where it isn't so beautiful right now. There's a lot of disinvested communities along that corridor. And when you're considering transit-oriented development, you want to think about preventing people from having to be displaced, because all of these places are upgraded in a way that we all want them to be, but there needs to be a way to ensure that the people that are there aren't pushed out. We don't have further gentrification, which then exacerbates all the problems we're talking about solving today.
Right. No, I completely agree. The planning for that investment in Los Angeles does include substantial resources to ensure that that doesn't happen. I would say that the alternative of not doing something is worse, though, because what you end up having people living in unattractive circumstances and all kinds of other costs that go with that, whether it's health or corrections or other things. So trying to do it in a way which makes it an attractive but a broadly accessible living opportunity is what the challenge is to make that right. And that is certainly, by the way, what is going on in Atlanta. It's not that what they've done is chased everybody out. It's actually made it attractive for people to invest in some of those parts of Atlanta that otherwise no one would have ever gone to unless they didn't have any other option. But you're absolutely right. It needs to be done in a thoughtful way to not displace existing residents. Yes.
Yes, I'm George Dondero. I'm with the Regional Transportation Commission here in Santa Cruz County, and I'm very much support everything you said about funding and financing for transportation. But I'd like everybody here to know that all 3 counties in the region are planning to have some kind of a ballot measure in November of 16, specifically for that purpose, so that our 3 counties can actually join the self-help club, as they call themselves in California. 85% of the people in the state live in counties where they've already done this, and we've been falling behind, and it's really, really important that we do exactly what you suggested, and that's to tax ourselves and have control over that money and know where it's going to go. And so I really encourage folks to get involved and to support those efforts.
Great. But
Is this on?
yes.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to punctuate Peggy's point. We have a lot of elected officials in this room, city, county, et cetera, around Dig Once. And it's fine to have an ordinance passed in the county of Santa Cruz, but we have found it incredibly difficult to move around all the various city councils in the region and actually get them to understand what it is and to act on it. And recently we've gone to the public works departments directly and are having specifications put together by the CCBC and just telling the city managers and so forth to, could you please do this? But I would just urge all the elected officials in the room that it's something that you all have to ask at every meeting. I've been asking about the Monterey Bay Sanctuary Scenic Trail, and I won't discuss rail trail or anything today, but I've been asking about the Monterey Bay Sanctuary Scenic Trail because it's being farmed out to each of the jurisdictions to build the trail that's in the MBSST plan. And I ask over and over again for each jurisdiction, are you putting conduit in the ground? And there's a lot of confusion. Some people say yes, some people say no. So it does come down to a cost issue, but if we're not making this minimal investment right now to ensure that we have an information highway that is, so we can take people off the roads, they can work at home more, then we're being really penny wise and pound foolish. And all of our electeds have to ask that question every time a road project or an infrastructure project comes up. Are we burying conduit? You know, are we putting fiber in the ground?
Great.
That was just a comment.
Okay.
Do you agree?
That's right. Yes. Yes. Please make it happen. It is one of the challenges. Almost by their nature, infrastructure investments cut across jurisdictional boundaries. And so, you do have to insist when it's within a boundary that it's happening. But this is why regional collaborations are so important on this, so you get alignment around what you're trying to do and then ensure that it works for the entire region and the connectivity, not just, BART stops in San Mateo because San Mateo County didn't vote for BART. So, Sanaya, I know we're just about at time, and I'm holding you up from a break. Please, I think I'm done.
Is there anybody who has the last question?
It's a very important question. Marcus Hayes, Silicon Valley Business Journal. If you can just tell me why there's so much IPA beer on the shelves.
All right, sir, all right.
This is great. I'll tell you that over a beer. So, yes, it's because people drink IPAs in California. That's why there's so much.
Wrap it there. We're going to thank Lenny very much for his talk.